welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer. I'm Dr. Greer and founder of SiriusDisclosure.com and the Disclosure Project. And I'd like to thank the folks at the World Puja Network for hosting us here every 2 weeks to bring you information and news about what we're doing on the world of disclosure, free energy, and contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. And really excited about what we're going to be talking about today. I have a wonderful gentleman here who has done so much work on the Sirius Facebook page, which is Sirius the Movie, on Facebook, and his name is Matt Humphrey. He's a volunteer who's been helping, who's done enormous amounts of work for us, and for which we are very grateful. And his interest in all this is to help clean up the planet and to make the world a better place for us to live. And he sees disclosure as an important part of that. And he has a background in marketing and consulting in holistic and botanical medicines and health foods and environmental products and music, and he's really a pure-hearted, wonderful person who stepped up to the plate when we needed the help. And I think we formed that Facebook page, and now it has something like 40 or 50,000 people following on it. So it's very good. So thank you very much, Matt Humphreys, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Greer, and it's a pleasure to be on here with you. Well, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to do is bring people up to date with some news of what's happening. And as many of you know, we're just finally getting the DVD master completed, and it's at the manufacturing facility. So in the next week or two, it's going to be manufactured and then begin to be shipped out. So those of you who have patiently, and we thank you, been waiting for your DVD of the film Sirius. That is going to be coming out very soon to all of you. And everyone who contributed to the film Sirius during the crowdfunding effort, who had given a certain amount, will be getting a complimentary one. Those of you who want to order them can go to SiriusDisclosure.com, and you can both see the film there on video on demand, and also you can order a copy of the DVD, which will be available worldwide and begin shipping within the next couple of weeks. So we're very excited that that's being done, and it pretty much wraps up the initial production of the film, and we're really grateful to everyone who's worked so hard on this to get it to this point, and all of you who contributed, because there's something like 4,000 people who have contributed to this film to make it the most successful crowdfunded documentary in history, and it's just going around the world now. It's been out now for a little over a month or a month and a half, and it's been very exciting to see how much interest there is in this film. So thank you, all of you, for your support. The other thing I want to say is that we're putting up on our website a page that describes what we're doing for funding the New Energy Research Lab for STAR, Sirius Technology and Research, and that is going to have the budget and our goals and objectives. And so you can go to SiriusDisclosure.com and see what kind of progress we're making with the fundraising and what our plans are for a 2-year period to do the research and development on the zero-point energy systems and other innovative technologies that would get us off oil, gas, and coal. So that is up on our site, and we're very excited that we'll be able to continue with that campaign, and we're hoping the public and perhaps some larger investors as well may come forward to help us realize that dream, because it's desperately needed. I also just wanted to make a note that I know many people have been asking about our expedition to England, to the crop circles in late July and early August. That is full, and it's got a waiting list. So unfortunately, there's no more spaces on that. We will be having or planning to put together a expedition for the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative that'll be in the western United States this fall. And we're still looking the way it looks like we may have found a really fantastic retreat center that's surrounded by national forests that we can all stay at together and have a really great meditative retreat experience. We're still getting the details of that worked out, but as soon as we have them, we'll let all of you know. And if you want to sign up for our newsletter that comes out every week or so, you can go to SiriusDisclosure.com and just sign up, and it's free to do so. There's no membership charge or anything like that. So anyway, so I know what we're planning to do today. Matt has been working with the Facebook crowd and has a whole series of questions that are coming in frequently to that page. And what he's going to do is sort of represent those who have had the questions and present them to me so we can have a discussion about what all of you have been asking about. So, Matt, do you want to begin with that?
Okay, yeah. Yesterday I put out there just a statement that Dr. Greer would like to talk about Sirius the Movie Facebook page, and just does anybody have any questions? And we got quite an overwhelming response, about 75 different questions.
Oh, boy. We'll get through a few of them.
Yeah, I think there's only time to deal with a couple of them. So, but one thing that seems to be on a lot of people's mind is what do you think we should do? How do you think we should deal with if the governments create a false flag operation or invasion, one that includes violence and fear?
Well, you know what's interesting? When I'm asked that question, what I immediately go to, which shocks people, is that they've already done it. And I know there's a pregnant pause there, but for about 50 years, the classified programs dealing with UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence has been feeding into the public an enormous amount of disinformation that's tailor-made to create fear and hatred of extraterrestrial civilizations. And this information has come out in a number of ways. The number one way is through the UFO subculture. The secondary way is through the Hollywood film industry and also through cable television series. So if you look at this subject and just step back, you'll see that about 80 to 90% of the material out there is framed in a very dualistic way of us versus them, and there are good ETs and bad ETs, and they've invaded, and they're taking people and doing horrible things to them, and on and on and on and on. It turns out that that was a plan that was concocted back in the 50s, and there's a CIA document that's, I know we have a lot of material on our website, but it's from 1953, where the CIA talks about using the subject for, and I'm quoting from this document, psychological warfare value and purposes. Then you find that there's a Strategic Studies Institute document from the 90s that talks specifically about creating a global fear around the alien issue by using what's called stagecraft to stage certain abduction scenarios and other frightening scenarios using advanced aerospace anti-gravity vehicles and other modalities to hoax events. And this shocks most people. So people have had real contact, and then there's other stuff that's gone on. I remember a number of years ago I was interviewing an Army Ranger who I could get to come out on publicly for the Disclosure Project, who was on a squad that was part of one of these abduction squads going around abducting people, making it look like it was an ET encounter when it wasn't. Now, this is not to say that everyone who's had an encounter with an ET or UFO has been targeted by a covert military program, but a lot have. And it's gotten mixed in with the real cases. And so what you find is that it's sort of like if you had some golden nuggets in a mountain of fool's gold and someone just dumped on the real contact events that people have had a whole mountain of other cases that had been designed to deceive people. And that is the problem what you have in on the internet and on this subject. And it's been actually a very effective program, because I remember years ago when my children were little giving a talk at an elementary school, and I was talking about what we were doing and going out and making contact and all the great experiences we'd had. And one of the little children, I think this was maybe 6 or 7 year old, said, "But aren't you afraid, Dr. Greer, that they're going to come and abduct you and torture you and do terrible things to you?" And this is a little child. So what you find is that this has found its way into the subculture so well. Now, why is that important? Because and you can look at the history of World War II, and for that matter, the Cold War and the war on terrorism to analyze this. You really can't get the public to support any kind of scenario, if it's false flag or what have you, without having first demonized an enemy. So certainly that's what Adolf Hitler did in sort of demonizing the Jewish population and gay people and the Roma, so-called Roma, the Gypsies, and others. And this has been done all through the Cold War and propaganda efforts. And it was done, of course, in other scenarios. The Gulf of Tonkin incident is a famous case, of course, where they hoaxed and staged an attack on our own Navy vessels to expand the Vietnam War, because there was growing consensus that we should just not go into that misadventure, and the military-industrial complex and the warmongers and profiteers wanted us to expand that operation. So this kind of manipulation goes on all the time. I know some people say that's a rather cynical view. It isn't a cynical view. It's a historic and accurate view. And for that reason, what I've always said to folks is knowledge is the greatest purifier. Wonderful quote from the Vedas. And if you know that something is being staged and there is stagecraft and that there are advanced anti-gravity devices made by Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman and other companies that can hoax an event, knowing that is halfway to not being tricked by it. So again, knowledge is very important, because in the vacuum of that, and this is what you find in the UFO subculture, a lot of people don't realize that what our capabilities are. So they think anything that goes bump in the night that's unusual has to be extraterrestrial, because they haven't studied what the capabilities are within the really high-end contracting world in the aerospace industry and the intelligence community, and importantly, counterintelligence and this sort of creating, sowing the seeds for a false flag operation. And of course, this was one of the things that Wernher von Braun on his deathbed was very concerned about, is that he knew personally about plans to eventually, after he said the Cold War and after global terrorism. And by the way, our testimony from Carol Rosin on that came before 9/11. Was acquired before 9/11. But then after that, they would play this card of a threat from outer space, like Ronald Reagan said at the UN, where wouldn't it be easier to unite the world if we had a common alien threat to unite against? And I always thought, when I heard that, I said, how sad that people think the only way we can unite each other is to create a bigger enemy in space. This is not going forward. This is taking 10 steps backward, because we're trading international conflict and ethnic conflict for interplanetary conflict, which isn't only insane, and not survivable, but a complete hoax. And so, but knowing about it and exposing that hoax is really, really important. Now, that I was told back years ago by a man who wrote something called The Controllers, a Martin Cannon, who had discovered a lot of these false flag operations that had been going on for decades in the UFO subculture. And he told me personally, he says, if you begin to expose this part of the agenda, they will do everything to marginalize you and defame you and attack you. And the counterintelligence community will stand up everything they can, because this is part of their long-term plan. And that's what Carol Rosin talked about, as did Wernher von Braun, is that there was this plan to be able to move from global superpower conflicts and then global terrorism issues to some larger existential threat that's out in space. And of course, that way you can grow the military-industrial complex from $1 trillion a year to $2 or $3 or $4 trillion a year globally. And it's a little bit like the movie Independence Day, where they go, let's kick alien butt, and it's like this whole, let's unite the world in fighting these marauding, and that's, of course, the stock and trade of 90% of Hollywood movies on this subject, as well as, unfortunately, most documentaries on this subject, which is why we wanted to do something different with the film Sirius. I don't think people really understand, Matt, how deep the capabilities are. Many people will see some of the things that have happened. They'll say, oh, well, humans couldn't have done that, could they? The answer is yes. I mean, if whatever you've heard about in terms of really high-tech military warfare in electronics and aircraft, there are things that are 20 generations more advanced that are in these so-called unacknowledged special access projects or super black projects. And have they been used to create scenarios that confuse people and scare people? Yes. So in a sense, we're already living in that period of, I call the preparatory phase. And for the most part, the public have bought that hook, line, and sinker. And that's the unfortunate part. I think all we can do is say, look, before everyone starts running Chicken Little style, oh my God, the sky is falling, people need to stop and look at what the agenda would be. Who benefits from this kind of us versus them duality? And is that really the future we want? Do we want to go from conflicts amongst people and ethnic groups and races and national groups and economic philosophies and what have you into interplanetary conflict? I think most sane people say no. But if people can be manipulated in their beliefs and their perspectives and their prejudices, then it makes it easy to then do something that would be a false flag event because they've already prepared people, like this little child that asked that question, to be predisposed towards thinking there's a threat out there, and that, oh yes, we need to come together as a people to resist that. Now, of course, when this was asked to me by a man at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base some years ago, there was a colonel, Canola, who was sort of very senior at the Foreign Aerospace Science and Technology Center, which had been the Foreign Technology Division of the Air Force that had received the Roswell crash remains. And when I was sitting out there at this meeting, a meeting he did not want to have, he was ordered to have it with us by the head of Air Force Intelligence, who was ordered by the head of Intelligence Joint Staff to make it happen. And he turned to me, he says, well, what if some of these civilizations are hostile? And I said, well, let's think about this for a minute. You're talking about civilizations that have the ability to go faster than the speed of light and travel amongst star systems. Their technologies would be in the hundreds of thousands to millions of years more advanced than ours. If they were hostile, we wouldn't be sitting in this room breathing the free air of Earth. It would have all been over about the time we detonated the first atomic bomb at the Trinity site. I said, the fact that they have not engaged in that kind of event, it kind of shows the kind of restraint they obviously have, because we have been firing at them periodically and occasionally hitting them. So I think that, the kind of fear that is out there, and if there's all kinds of phobias out there. There's racism and anti-Semitism and homophobia, and you can add to this now exophobia, the fear and hatred of extraterrestrials. This is sort of the thing that is not useful, but I think that if you were looking at it from a strategist point of view of how do we control large numbers of people on a subject that they don't really control. They don't really control what the ETs are doing and how they're coming and going. They know that they can control psychologically the masses through fear-engendering events, which is exactly, the kinds of things that have happened in other false flag operations. So I think the only way to handle that is to discuss it, put it out there, and this Strategic Studies Institute document is up. We have it. This is something that other people, before I got involved in this subject, Matt, there were folks who had done very extensive research into the hoaxing and staging of frightening pseudo-encounter events. But no one wants to hear that because everyone likes to have someone to hate. And so it's unfortunate that that's a part of human nature that has this sort of tribalistic aspect where we're wanting to find something other than us that we feel superior to, that we can hate and then engage in warfare. And this has been the organizing principle for humans for many, many thousands of years. And I think what we have to do is say, isn't it time for us to find a different way of living that isn't based on someone other than us that we have to be afraid of and hate and engage in violent conflict with? With the kind of technology we're talking about, which are much more sophisticated weapons, say what are called scalar and other type of weapons than the weapons that are say, thermonuclear, atomic weapons. With that kind of technology, you're talking about a non-survivable event if there was a conflict. Because even with nuclear weapons, it was called mutual assured destruction. And, Carl Sagan used to talk about the nuclear winter, and it'd be just the end of life as we know it if we had a full-out conflict with the Soviet Union. Do people really think that we're going to go Star Wars style out in space and have interplanetary conflict? Well, this is silly, because people who think that have looked at too much science fiction and haven't thought about what the consequences of these kinds of technologies that have been weaponized, and they are weaponized in classified projects, would do if there was this kind of engagement with a threat from outer space, as Ronald Reagan called it. Mm-hmm. So this is a really deep issue. I mean, at some point one could do an entire book on this. A few people beat me to the punch on the other side of the discussion, and I know a couple years ago there were some Lockheed Martin scientists who talked about how we shouldn't try to make any contact with extraterrestrials because it's likely that they will want to engage in a hostile conflict, but we need to be preparing now for that conflict. And, of course, these were people who were tied into the aerospace industry, which would receive the contracts for the multi-trillion-dollar build-up.
The reality is that the opposite is really closer to the truth, that at least it's my understanding that most of what we would consider to be more real contacts have been very benevolent, and
they've been benevolent. Yes, they've been benevolent. They've been scientific, or they've been wanting to have us understand them and have them understand us better. And I always say, part of this is an anthropocentric projection, and what I mean by that is people project onto something that really says more about themselves than what they're discussing. And I think that, one of the great sayings in the Vedas, it's more on the World Puja Network, I like referencing the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas a lot, is that the world is as you are. And if you are about fear and insecurity and hatred, you're going to project that out there onto others. And in this case, since you're dealing with something that is really different from another race or another continent or another people or economic system. You're talking about civilizations from another planet. It's very ripe for exploiting if you want to exploit that part of human nature, to be afraid of the unknown or to be afraid of the otherness, which, of course, is the roots of racism and all the other isms. But I think what we have to think is, okay, over this past 100 years, what have we learned? Have we learned the lessons of the Jim Crow era and the Cold War and the Holocaust and these other horrific things that humans have done to each other? And for all the fear-mongering that goes on the ET issue, I always point out, look, let's not get carried away here with that. We can show that 200 million people have been killed on planet Earth through warfare at our own hands in the last century alone, never mind through recorded history. So we've become a sort of an existential threat to ourselves, and this is an existential threat to ourselves, but then the question becomes very quickly, are we being viewed as not only a threat to ourselves, but a threat to others? And if we start going into space with very advanced systems that are way beyond the space shuttle, with the consciousness of otherness as opposed to cosmic consciousness and oneness, we are a very risky group of people at that point. So I think, when I've heard these stories from so many of the Disclosure Project witnesses who are at nuclear facilities and Strategic Air Command and nuclear weapons processing facilities where there were these ET craft that came over and were checking out what we were doing. Many witnesses who recount the ETs watching what we were doing with the space program. Why would they be concerned with that? Well, because they saw that we went from, in a couple generations, from horse and buggies, all right, when my dad was around in the early 1900s, to thermonuclear weapons and early space travel. Well, this is a very worrisome trajectory by any dispassionate observer, I think.
Yes. So should we move on to another question, or?
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, but those are my thoughts on that.
Okay. A lot of users, a lot of people that are on the Facebook page would like to know if you have any plans to make another documentary or a video that might be focusing specifically on the CE5s.
Yes, in fact, as those of you who want to go and see the film Sirius, you can see it online now, and you get the DVD, and we hope to have more theaters showing it soon. And the film Sirius goes into the whole concepts of close encounters of the fifth kind, which is when people using the protocols we've developed that involve very Vedic concepts of consciousness and remote viewing, make contact and invite contact with these interstellar civilizations without prejudice. In other words, we're not saying this race can come and that. We're not engaging in interstellar racism when we do this. It's a very ambassador, conscious and non-dualistic framework, that's the hardest part for people to get through, first of all. But once people get to that point and they realize that these protocols really do work, and on our website you can go to SiriusDisclosure.com, and there are Android and iPhone apps where the entire meditation procedure, remote view program, the tones that we project out into space are all in this app. It's a very large app. It's like, 50 megabytes or something. But that you can get and begin to practice this. And there are now thousands and thousands of people around the world doing it. And one of the things that I would like to be able to do at some point would be at least maybe a 45-minute to hour documentary only on that, and it is something that we want to do, in my spare time. But because I think people need a more intensive training that would be involved in a really just exclusive treatment on that subject, and it is something we do plan to do, although it may not be until later this year or next year, just because of the time schedule and my schedule. The rate limiting thing on all this is time, and of course resources. But it's more a time issue, but that is something we are planning. It is actually on the drawing board, and we're outlining it. And I want to point out that there's an enormous amount of photographic and audio evidence and experiences that we've had over the years, some of which are outlined in the book Extraterrestrial Contact, Countdown to Transformation, that you can get on our website. That comes with a DVD that also shows a lot of the really amazing and cool things that have happened. But I'd like to, it would be wonderful to put that into a instructional documentary just on that, and that is something we are planning to do. My own view of it is that if we have time to do it in the next year or so, is to do an entire course that would involve when we go out for a week, such as we are in England, where the sessions would be recorded and edited into certain specific modalities. So it probably would be more like a 10 or 20-part series that would go very in-depth into meditation, remote viewing, the contact protocols, the kinds of phenomenon that we experience that range from craft appearing to electronic tones emerging out of transdimensional space-time to fully materialized objects that are near us, or transdimensional beings that are ETs that are floating outside the circle that you can see as sort of an energy field that when you've digitally photographed them show up like the photograph that's on the website, on the CSETI site. So these are all things that would be great to have in a not only just a documentary, but then an entire course that would be on videotape that we could make available. And that is something I do want to do in the next year or so, because I think so many people would enjoy that. A lot of people can't get free to go on these week-long expeditions all over the world, but that's something that we've never done. Now we have someone on our team who's a videographer and a budding filmmaker who, by the way, just did this amazing, I guess it's about 14-minute video on the Atacama humanoid that you can, if you go to SiriusDisclosure.com, there's a link to it, and it's free for anyone to see. It goes to a Sirius Disclosure YouTube channel that has this really great summary that he put together from all the evidence we have so far on this little tiny 6-inch.
Yes, I think he did a great job on that little film, and it also helps to answer some of the unanswered questions that are out there about the Atacama humanoid.
Yeah, have you seen it, Matt? Did you get the
Yes.
answer? Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I think he did a great job, and I think Zan Gillies did a wonderful job, and so we're hoping that we can do something on the CE5 initiative. We're planning in the next few weeks to do something just on what we want to do with the Energy Research Lab. That would also go up like that. That would go through a lot of what our plans are, what the issues are, what the strategy is.
Yep, a lot of people have questions about that as well.
Oh, do they? Okay, well, that's great.
Just, where are the funds going and how, what type of progress is, being made towards the Energy Lab, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I mean, of course, we're in the very early stages of any fundraising, but there's a couple of $100,000 that's been raised, which is good. The budget that is up on the website as of when folks are hearing this recording is a $6.3 million 2-year budget. Now, one of the things I want to explain there, a lot of people have asked, well, why don't you start something before you reach that goal? And I said, well, we've already done that. And people are a little confused by that. For the last, 14 years, we spent a few $100,000 going all over the world investigating claims of people who had these sort of devices. Most of them turned out not to be what they were advertising, frankly. Then we were providing some grants to people who had ideas, who seemed to have good concepts, but they were never able to do it by themselves in their spare time in their basements and workshops, even if it was a substantial grant that we provided. Then the folks who had the technologies or were on the path to would then get threatened or get a knock on the door. And this happened in the not so distant past. What we concluded from this experience, and it's a lot of frustrating encounters where we literally went all over the world investigating this, is that there's a lot of great folks out there who, if they were brought together in a synergistic way, could do something. But when people are lone wolves trying to do this, they either can't do it, or if they get close to doing it, they're then intimidated and it gets taken out. And so that model, which we knew at the time was unlikely to succeed, but that's all the funding we had, we tried. So a lot of people have suggested, why don't you do that? Well, we've done that, and it was done very thoroughly. And so my conclusion from doing this for about 14 years is that it needs to be, one of two things has to happen. Either someone has something that they're willing to come forward with that is not a black box. And what do I mean by a black box? It's sort of like the problem that Rossi is having in Italy, where he has this potential cold fusion system, but nobody knows what's going on inside the system. And so since no one can reproduce it independently, of course, people are going to say, well, we don't know if it's a legitimate, scientifically reproducible effect or not. And ultimately, the sine qua non of science is independent scientific reproducibility. And what we have found is that a lot of people won't cooperate with that because they become so paranoid and, in a sense, worried that someone's going to steal their idea that they won't do it. And one famous case that happened that came to us 2 different ways was a person out in the Midwest that had one of these devices, and it sounded quite legitimate. But basically, he wanted to do a black box demonstration where we could not know anything of what was inside the box. But to even get to that stage, he wanted us to wire $10 million into a Swiss bank account. Well, I don't have $10 million, and neither I don't think Matt has $10 million. And even if you found a billionaire, they wouldn't do it because it's just so crazy. So what you find with some of these folks is that even if they have something, and this was, of course, the Achilles heel for Stan Meyer, who did have an over-unity electrolysis system that would break water into hydrogen and oxygen. And we did investigate that, and it did happen. Unfortunately, the patents that he put out there deliberately put in the wrong voltages and cycles per second resonance for the electronics to dissociate the water into so-called Brown's gas, or what he called it, this H2O, that is the hydrogen and oxygen, into a gaseous mixture that's actually magnetically charged, and that will then be able to be used in a combustion engine. And it takes very little power to do it if you have the right sweet spot in the electronic coils that dissociate the water and into hydrogen and oxygen. But he deliberately put the wrong information in the patents, which is why no one's... And then he died suddenly. And his twin brother was so intimidated by how he died, which was very suspicious, that he doesn't want to step into this for fear of reprisals or something bad happening to him. So I think that the way we need to do this is to put together a laboratory that has basically what we're doing streaming on the Internet, and that is done as open source as is humanly possible, so that the public is involved and knows, because secrecy doesn't work. And this is what I've been trying to say to inventors for years. The sort of the inventor syndrome, where they want to become very secretive, doesn't work. So what we're proposing to do is to raise what in research and development world is a very small amount of funding, $6.3 million, to have a lab that's staffed with around 18 people initially, of engineers, physicists, machinists, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, materials specialists who know what specialized materials, and then customized high voltage, very high voltage analyzers, so that you can create signals that are into tens of thousands to millions of volts, but at very low current, where you begin to hit a resonant frequency, whether it's in water or crystalline material or nanocrystalline material or coils, that result in this zero-point energy access vector that gets created in space-time. And we understand the principles. We have a lot of information on how to do it. It is a serious physics and engineering process to do that. And I tweeted the other day, kind of tongue-in-cheek, that if we had 10% of what the IRS spends on its frivolous parties, we could do this. And so our goal is to do it that way, because the other ways that people have suggested doing it, we've actually already done.
Well, and then the transparency aspect of it provides a certain safety net as well.
Well, that's actually why we did disclosure the way we did. I mean, we were collecting information, witnesses, materials for a number of years, and it all came out at that National Press Club event 12 years ago. And you squeeze the toothpaste out of the tube in such a way that it can't be put back in. Moreover, you have millions of people watching it. And at that time, that was the most watched event in the history of the Internet at the time. Not just at the National Press Club, but in the world.
Wow.
And so, yes, and that is a statistical true statement. So if we do this with the Energy Research Project, we need to do that the same way. And when there is something where we do hit that sweet spot, and there is I don't care if it's 100 watts of, quote, free energy that is reproducible and provable, that goes viral. And it gets reproduced at multiple places. We've already lined up in universities who are people willing to do it, and the public knows it. But it needs to be done in a way that can be it can't be a black box, because even though I know 99.999% of inventors who work on things, I put all my life's work into this and I want to get something for it. But the truth is, with 7 billion people on the planet, any group that would be the first out of the gate with something like this, there are so many opportunities for energy generation that would create the funding needs that any inventor would ever need. So this sort of secretive, keep it, the mindset of Silicon Valley with the next iPhone or the next video app or the next whatever, where everything is so secretive, and you have a bond and you sign your life away because you're working on some tchotchke that's really just a piece of junk made in a Chinese slave factory. I mean, when you're talking about the Apple products, there's all this nonsense that goes into that, and that mindset will work for an app or a software program. It will not work for a technology that the national security, the super national security state that's actually transnational, not just in U.S., but Russian scientists who've tried to do this, British scientists have all run into this buzzsaw where horrific things have happened. It can't be done in that secretive way, and so the secrecy is your enemy, whereas doing it in a very open way is your friend and is your protector, and the public will be your guardians, is how I look at it. I mean, in the sense that the covert programs do not want to step into, they have their own buzzsaws up, but they don't want to step into the buzzsaw of millions of people seeing overtly some goons going in with a national security order, seizing something that would get us off fossil fuels and keep the world from going belly up environmentally, etc. So I think at a certain point you have to understand that the strategy and is what's key. And you have to then back up your plans and your funding and how you're going to do it based on the strategy, which has been built on the study of the last 100 years of these types of devices, all the way back to Tesla and before, and how they were suppressed, how they were bought up and black-shelved. And this becomes another problem. A lot of people say, aren't there wealthy people who will just fund this? I say, yeah, well, you would think that's the case. And in reality, there aren't, because when they begin to drill into it, they're afraid if they're the primary funder, something bad will happen to them or their family. Well, how do I know this? Because I've met with many of them. And I think, so the public has to say, well, if we want to do it, let's do it. Now, we have 80-some thousand people on our mailing list. If everyone on that list every month basically clicked the donate button and gave $10, which is the price of a deli sandwich, in a few months we'd have that budget. It is true. And what I have said to people, if the public doesn't want to support it, I don't want to hear people complain about it's not out there, because you're not going to do a serious physics research and development program like this for nothing. And if you do it in an undercapitalized way, where someone's trying to do this in their spare time out on their farm, you're setting yourself up for what we've already gone through in the last 10 years, and that is some very fruitless and dangerous experiences. So having learned from that, what I've concluded is that this is how it needs to be done. Now, let's say if we don't reach that point, then I think what we have to do is continue to provide the educational the information and the educational materials and programs so that more and more and more people in the world get educated on the subject, so we do reach that target. So that's what we would do if we don't, if the funds don't reach the point, because you really can't ask someone who's in a professional career track to leave their job when you only had 2 months of funding in the bank or a month of funding in the bank. No one's going to do that. So the reality is, if you're going to do this, let's be serious about it, make pun intended, and do it in a way that is professional and that also strategically is safe and secure, and that has learned from the mistakes of folks like Tesla and Dirac and T. Henry Moray and Stanmeyer, and the experience of our own team with the Orion Project over the last decade. If you don't learn from these experiences, you're going to repeat them. And so that's what we're trying to bring to this strategically. And so that's what it would be positioned to do. Now, I don't know if the public and or some people who have higher net worths who could contribute more funds to this effort will step up to the plate and do it. All we can do is articulate our plan and put it out there and see if there's support for it. And if there is, we can go forward. If not, we'll continue to work this every way we can. And so that's what we're trying to do. And I would say to people who are asking about it, it's really more up to everyone listening, because everyone with social media and Facebook and Twitter can network this information to everyone they know. And if a lot of people provided a little bit of support, we'd be there.
Well, yeah, and then once again, the whole issue of not having the money come from one source, which could, be squelched, or could be, a vehicle for squelching the whole program if it was, all the eggs in one basket. But, we really appreciate all the support that any viewer of the movie or anybody out there wants to contribute. It's easy to do that. Just go to SiriusDisclosure.com. We have a donation page there.
Well, and the other thing is that if someone does have an operational device, and I don't rule out that there could be someone out there, we're very happy to look into that if they can be rational. We're not interested in someone sending us a videotape of saying, see, this works, now send me $500,000 so I can do more work on it. Well, that happened this week. So that's not going to happen. So let's, get out of crazy town for a nanosecond and talk real world. What we need to have is the ability to, if someone has something, that they would cooperate with transparent testing by independent people and independent reproduction of the system to show that it is reproducible and there's not some trick going on. And the reason that's so important is that, I'll give you one example. A few years ago, there was someone who had a black box. It was a circuit that was encased in resin, plastic. And they claimed that if you put this in the power supply to any motor, it reduced by 50% the amount of energy it would use because it was pulling energy out of the infinite field of energy, and et cetera. So we said, oh, that's really cool. And in fact, the Southwest Research Institute had done a test on it and said, yeah, it is. So we took this, did an MRI, because we couldn't take it apart. And we found out that it had a circuit that was changing the power phase angle and tricking the meters. It was using the same amount of power, but the meter was being alternated by a feedback loop that changed what's called the power phase angle. And electrical engineers will know what I'm talking about. And it was a total scam. So, now it took us months, and Dr. Eugene Malov and some of the most brilliant people, and God rest his soul, he was murdered a few years ago, got to the bottom of it. But so we have to have something where we don't have to spend 6 months and $100,000 to see what's going on, because there could be some little trick in there. Right?
Right.
I don't know. If that's too much to ask for, I would tell people, please don't contact us. Because we've been down that path for 10 or 12 years. We've spent untold hours, traveled all over the world, hundreds of thousands of dollars to go through one experience like that after another. So, in a sense, I'm just going to be really, let's be honest. If someone has something legitimate, it needs to be able to be transparently tested. If not by us, who? DARPA? The Department of Energy? It ain't going to happen. So we will do that. But there are certain criteria that have to be met. And they're reasonable criteria. Because if we can't transparently see what's going on in there instead of a black box, we're not interested in even hearing about it at this stage, because we've been down that path a dozen times. Secondly, it has to be reproducible. So if you can't have an independent person, if they want to do a non-disclosure agreement, they can reproduce it. And if it's not a reproducible science, it's not a real science. This is the sine qua non of science. So I think that those are reasonable expectations. And let's get to the punchline. If you're really wanting this to get out to the public, to 7 billion people who desperately need it, it's eventually going to have to go to massive manufacturing where a lot of people are going to know what's in there. And the first 1,000 people who buy it are going to be people who are going to take it apart, reverse engineer it, and come out with a better mousetrap. So this whole secretive paranoia stuff is, dare I say, nonsense. And we really don't have time to waste on nonsense at this point. The world is in an emergency. We're in a geopolitical and environmental emergency and an existential threat to the survival of our species and to our planet going forward. So we need to be mature and thoughtful about this, and that's all we're asking anyone who would approach us with an existing device, that they cooperate in that way. And if they don't want to, and they have a different philosophy about patenting and secrecy, that's fine. But they should go to someone else and not to us.
And so hopefully all of these efforts can help move us in the direction opposite from our addiction to oil.
Right. I mean, that's the goal. The goal is, well, there's several goals. We have to, first of all, understand and map out in our minds where do we want to be in a year, 5 years, 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years? As the Chinese saying goes, unless we change directions, we're likely to end up where we're going. And we're headed towards a really terminal, dreadful event if we stay on the path we're on. So we need a pretty dramatic course correction, and it's getting pretty late in the game, in my opinion, to do it. It should have happened 100 years ago when Tesla and others started coming out with this information. We certainly should have world peace, and on top of that, universal peace. We need to bring out these technologies that are used for peaceful and not weaponized purposes, and we need to come together as a people and decide to do that. And the consciousness of, what I call the people of hate, who are always trying to figure out someone new to hate, that we also have to leave behind. Because if you look at the last 100 years, it was either, I grew up in the South in the Jim Crow era in the 50s, 60s, and it was either black people, or there was misogyny, or it's this race, or this creed, or that religion, or gay people, or this person, or that. There's always someone new to hate. And now, of course, the new, as I said, exophobia, the new thing that people like to get together and be afraid of are the ETs. But so that whole consciousness of division precludes a future. Because with these kinds of technologies, we can't go forward with the mindset of conflict and division. There will always be diversity and differences of opinion, but it doesn't have to go to the point of armed conflict and the kind of things that have happened in the last 100 years. So that's the big conscious choice we need to make, and that becomes the consciousness of peace and of oneness. And the experience of that in consciousness and higher states of consciousness becomes the foundation for safely bringing out these sciences and technologies so that they can be used for the betterment of humanity. And I've had people say, we'll never be evolved enough to handle this. I said, well, we better be. Because we don't have another 100 years of burning fossil fuels and engaging in warfare with, various types of increasingly advanced weapons. There is a big change that we have to make, and the sooner we make it, the better it will be for ourselves and our children and our grandchildren. And that's what gets me up every day to keep doing this, is the realization that this is well within our reach. In other words, the thing that I find really beautiful about this is that everything we need to know and everything that we need to have in terms of science, technology, and even consciousness and understanding is on the planet right now. It needs to be organized and brought out. And that requires, it is a heavy lift because there are a lot of special interests, shall we say, who want to move things in the other direction of centralized global control, continuation of the petrodollar control system and macroeconomic slavery. The people who want to keep people divided with a new enemy to fight want to present the us versus them scenario for ETs and humans. There are all these agendas that are operating which belong to the past yuga, the Kali Yuga, the one that's closing. I call it the 452,000-year yuga that we need to get over. And I see that there's another era that's in the process of opening over the last 100 years or so, which is a 500,000 years of conscious evolution and really developed society that's not only peaceful but very high-tech, but with the consciousness that these technologies are used for the common good and for peaceful purposes, and eventually the exploration of space. And what I've always said is that with people, when they go out on these CE5 contact expeditions, if they go out there under the stars with a pure heart and an innocent frame of mind, without prejudice and fear and negativity of this or that or the other ET group, they find that the universe opens up in mysterious and amazing ways very quickly, sometimes enigmatically, sometimes not in ways that you would expect, but these civilizations are waiting and watching and ready to welcome us, but there are certain criteria that need to be met. We can't go out there into this future with the consciousness of the nastiness and conflict and division that has dominated the last 100 years. And so it's an evolutionary process. It's both consciousness and thought and also technology, all that needs to come together. And the good news is that all that is known and here. We just need to gather the momentum. And the wonderful thing is the more people who understand that and practice meditation and see this good future and visualize it and do things to help make it happen, it creates this stirring in this, what Rupert Sheldrake called the morphogenic field, that, like the 100th monkey, where it non-locally propagates and manifests that good future. So this is really in our hands more than people realize. Everyone wants to look to the boogeyman and the so-called majestic group keeping this stuff secret. I said, you know what? It's what I said in the film series. We're going to just leave the Pentagon and all those folks behind. Let's just create something better and new. And as Einstein said, no problem was solved with the consciousness that created it. We have to bring a new consciousness and understanding into this, and that's what we're trying to do at SiriusDisclosure.com and with the film Sirius, but also with these research efforts and contact protocols. And the more that people join and do this together in a cooperative and positive way, the more it does change the course of our planet and our civilization in a good direction. And I think people have to empower themselves with that knowledge that we really have more power individually and collectively than we give ourselves credit for. And we give too much power to interests that would want to stop us. It's not that they're not real, and I've certainly gone through the buzzsaw dozens and dozens and dozens of times with people who are detractors and attackers and stalkers and defamers and all kinds of nasty stuff. But that's really noise. The real issue is this vision that has to guide us as a people into a really beautiful future, a transformative future. And that's what we stay connected to. And if we stay connected to that and we work together to do it, it will come to pass.
That's excellent. How much are we almost out of time here? Or do we have?
We have another maybe 5 minutes. So yeah, we can take some more.
One more question.
Sure.
If you're on a CE5 expedition and practicing the CE5 protocols, once you make contact with an alleged extraterrestrial, then what's the next step after that?
Well, I think that the main thing is that if you're in a state of consciousness where there is both remote viewing and direct contact, that you stay in that state. And it's really not about any particular agenda of a conversation. It's about coming together and being together. And that's the experience we've had at this phase. And so I think that if there's we have been on expeditions where people have physically been touched, where in Joshua Tree once 4 ETs materialized physically under some Joshua trees that the group saw that were there and then dematerialized. So the main thing is to stay peaceful and centered and convey your intent that you are an ambassador from humanity and Earth to their people, because what it's really about at this stage is building the communication and the contact and the relationship, and that can take place in many forms. I know one of the first nights we were out in Borrega Springs a couple years ago, there was a policeman and a fireman they were a married couple from New York City that and she and her husband came, and they just saw the Earth. They did this with such an innocent and pure heart. And that night, there was a craft that was transdimensionally humming outside their room. And in their bedroom was an ET that was there for, I think, a couple of hours that they both saw and were in this state, of communication and contact with in the most beautiful state of consciousness and communication. And what will be conveyed depends on the individual. If you're there with an entire team, the intent would be for everyone on that team to have contact with ambassadors from their civilization to you, and to have that as a continuing process that goes on. And it does. People in the lucid dream state, in the meditative state, and physically around their house or in their yards will have this continue. And at this phase, what we're doing is wanting to build this relationship that is built on the concept of the oneness that exists in universal consciousness, that the mind itself is this infinite field that all of us can come together in, and it's the ultimate communication system, is mind itself. And every point in space and time is actually connected through the awareness of every individual. So every person is a quantum hologram that's connected to everywhere in the cosmos. This is what's amazing about the nature of conscious reality. And once you begin to experience that, and the ETs, you have an experience with a craft or an individual ET, your intent is to continue that relationship that can take place in many, many forms, in many dimensions, including physically, sometimes, not always, but it can evolve that way. And how it evolves, I think, has a lot to do with the readiness and the preparation of the individual, as well as what the ETs are interested in exploring with that individual. My experience is that these civilizations are very eager to make these sort of personal contacts with people and in groups if folks are in the right intent. And the question of intent, why you're doing this, why are you there, becomes determinative and more important than any technical restraint. And so I always say to folks, if you're there for the right reasons, to make contact and be in a peaceful state. And when I've had these experiences, I actually put my hands out with my palms facing outward, with my arms hanging beside my side, and make sort of a triangular vector with my two hands and my third eye, connecting with them and inviting them in a state of universal peace and the oneness that we share as conscious beings, because the mind and consciousness that's within us and the sentient conscious faculty that's within these ETs is the same single mind. And that knowledge and experience becomes then the gateway to very easy communication and continuing and ongoing contact that can take place in many, many ways, whether it be physical 3D, lucid dream, astral, meditative thought, electronic, all the ways that we outline in the book, Countdown to Transformation. So I think that's really what you want to do. It's more of a process within yourself and preparation, and then seeing where it goes with any given ET and species. And frequently, when we've done this, there will be many different species together from different civilizations. And I think that people underestimate themselves and how easy it is actually to do this. And the people who begin to practice this on any regular basis with a small group or even by themselves begin to have amazingly beautiful experiences. And they happen as you're ready for them to unfold.
So there's really a lot of different ways to access this experience then, either through a group, a formal training with your group, or which people can get to through etcontactnow.com, or on their own using the app. There's an app.
Right.
Or once you know the protocols and have some training, then you can form your own group or work with Costa Macraeus's groups, which there are, I think, over 1,000 groups now. So there's a lot of different ways to get at this material.
Right, and I think that ultimately, even if it's yourself and a few people where you live doing this on some regular basis, it develops the skill of meditation, remote viewing, and contact. And we have found that the ETs always manifest in some way. Now, it may not be the mothership landing where you go on board and have bagels and lox. I mean, people have a very, almost childish concept of the way interstellar civilizations would interact. They can do that. And that has happened, but that's the least likely way. The more likely way are the whole array of experiences that we've outlined. And I think it isn't, see, what happens is less important than what state you're in that facilitates it happening. And that state is the meditative, deep state of oneness in consciousness, cosmic awareness. And civilizations that travel amongst the stars, that go from one point to another, in order to do that, they are dropping out of 3D, 4D space-time, and they're going into other dimensions that are increasingly thought substance, astral. And their technologies are operating at that level, and then they reemerge into this dimension. But they may reemerge only partially, and it may be a sphere. It may be something that looks like a hologram. It may be an energy field. It may be a tone that's like a crystalline signal that's around you that conveys knowledge and information in a very abstract way. There are so many ways that these civilizations do this. So I think we try to project the way that we would, drive up in our car to someone and go and say hi and shake hands. But I think that when we're talking about civilizations that are transdimensional, because they're interstellar, by definition they're transdimensional. If you're going from one star system to another, you have to go faster than the speed of light. When you do that, you're in these other dimensions. And I think at that point, once you understand what I call the new cosmology, the understanding of this conscious quantum hologram that's aware and is multiple dimensions that include space and time and stars and galaxies, but include all these other types of fields of energy and thought forms, and Vedic tonality, for example, you begin to understand that the contact happens in a very diverse number of ways, depending on where you are, what's around, who you are, and what everyone is ready to experience. And so preparing yourself is the key thing, and practicing it makes it more and more perfect. And we have found that the groups that have been doing this for a few years have just amazing experiences in the whole array of objects that are materialized, craft overhead, beings that appear in the field in ways that are transdimensional or kind of like holographic conscious beings, like the picture of this E.T. At Joshua Tree. So many different ways. And I think that this, getting back to where we started on this particular show, this is one of the reasons why I do want to do a documentary and sort of a tutorial on this, so that people get a sense of what kinds of things might you experience and have we experienced, and how do they appear? Because it's not just one simple answer, and it has much more to do with the state of consciousness the person and the team is in than anything the ETs are about, because they can appear in a multiplicity of ways, all of which are fascinating and beautiful, but if you don't know what you're looking at and you're not ready for it, you're going to miss it altogether. So that's part of the educational process.
And it's an experience that's not limited to a few people. Everybody can develop a facility for it.
I think if you're a conscious human being, you can do this. I mean, I've always said that the birthright of every human is that they are conscious and they are able to create, have this experience and understand it. It's about learning and practicing the skill set of meditation and remote viewing and the other protocols, and it really isn't that difficult. But, you do have to practice. It's like, if you want to bench press 400 pounds, you don't go in there and do that the first day. So, it's a skill, and it's something you develop, and everyone can develop it. And I've found that there's no one, if you approach this with the idea that you can do it, with a pure heart and intent, you can do it, and it will happen. If you think to yourself you can't do it, well, you won't do it. But that's like everything in life. So you have to have a certain amount of confidence and faith in yourself and in the reality that these civilizations are there, and they're really waiting for people to awaken and do this together. Because certainly they're not waiting on the State Department or the United Nations to do it. They're looking to us. They're looking to the people. So, well, I think we're out of time. I would like to thank you, Matt, for organizing all this and then interacting with everyone on the Facebook page and being part of this program today. It's been wonderful speaking with you.
Yeah, and thanks so much to you too, Dr. Greer. It's been a very enlightening chat.
All right. Well, thank you, and all of you at the World Puja Network, thank you for hosting us here, and all of you listeners, keep looking up. And to find out more about what we're doing, you can go to SiriusDisclosure.com. That's SIRIUS Disclosure.com. And until next time, Godspeed. Bye-bye.